Good morning and welcome to the session 2 on the unit managing communication. Today we are going to just follow on with what we've left and covered yesterday in the learning outcome 1, and just a quick recap in terms of what we did. We looked at starting this particular unit because this unit helps us understand and develop knowledge and understanding about how communication takes place in a workplace, especially in an organization or a business that we work in, and what are the potential pitfalls and the benefits of developing good communicational practices in organizations. What we're going to do with regards to this is, when we started this unit, we discussed the first learning outcome, and the first learning outcome primarily focused on understanding how information and knowledge can be communicated in an organization or within an organization. This basically meant that we looked at various processes of communication in terms of how the communication process works. We also looked at different forms of communication which happen within an organization, whether it be verbal, non-verbal, written communication. And then we went into understanding in a bit in terms of some of the techniques that we use to transmit, communicate data, information, and knowledge. We also looked at understanding how systems and IT can help us in transmitting or help us in actually communicating this information and knowledge to various stakeholders within the organization. Stakeholders being, employees, customers, suppliers, government. It could be, shareholders, board members, and things like that, and what set of information they need. So the requirement of, say, for example, the board members in terms of information they need from within the company could be in the form of, financial statements, which is very different from the information which the shareholders would need in terms of profitability or, balance sheet and things like that, which helps give an idea that whether the company is doing well or is not doing well. And then towards the end, what we also looked at is we looked at the, the basis of what could be the barriers to effective communication in an organization. And sometimes it could be the clarity of message, or if the message is ambiguous, or it's not written well, or there are too many jargons used, and things like that. Essentially here the idea was to primarily understand what could be the barriers, and the barriers that we looked at was that technology can be an enabler, can also be a barrier at times. We also looked at interpersonal relationship and how they could be classed as barriers. Sometimes it was, the choice of medium that you choose to communicate could be considered a barrier, and those are the aspects that we look at in outcome 1. Now today, what we're going to do is continue with our journey in this particular unit and go to learning outcome 2. And in learning outcome 2, what we are looking at doing is we are going to be focusing on understanding how and what factors actually affect workplace communication. So we're going to be a bit more specific and dwell into a bit more deeper, just not understanding, kind of taking our understanding forward from, what factors affected the communication in workplace. From there, we will go on to understand, how these factors specifically affect communication in the workplace. So let's go across to, some of the clear things that we do understand. Now, most organizations, what we see is have different hierarchies, and these structures and hierarchies, which when we talk about structures, could be a matrix structure, functional structure, hierarchical structure, divisional structure. So when we look at these structures within organization and how they are, how employees are kind of put into the organizational chart, we do see that these structures lead to the creation of some sort of an organizational culture. And when we see that the structure of the organization, the hierarchy of the organization, some of the values which are incorporated into the vision and mission statement of the company, they also influence how the culture of the organization shapes up. Now, we live in a global era in terms, when I say most companies, have operations across different geographies. They are multinationals, or, they services in different countries. So here, the idea is to understand if an organization, is going to look at effective communication and have the necessary impact. If it's coming across from a manager or from a, somebody in the management, then how would this communication have an impact and be understood within different departments or within the organization. So when we look at this, we understand three factors. One is the language, which could be a place, which could be one of the factors which could influence communication. We look at certain customs, and I'll come to that, the culture and the customs of different places, types of people which work with the organization. And last but not the least, we also look at when organizations operate across boundaries, what is essentially they have to keep in mind to make sure that they are able to localize and utilize and incorporate the culture into the organization to make it work effectively. So what we do see is a couple of factors which come across, and they kind of influence the various techniques or various ways in which communication happens within an organization, and they could be overarching factors, could be the value and culture. So globalization and IT, they have brought together diversity in organization. Today, companies are able to kind of employ people from different geographies, and does not necessarily mean that the employees have to be in the one location, but they can work across from different locations for a similar organization. And this poses a number of challenges, and these challenges are primarily due to the value, culture, and of the people or the staff or employees which work within the organization. So here the idea is to look at a channel and a medium of communication which helps the manager or helps the organization to be able to put the message across effectively in terms of managing the cross-cultural communication. We also see that to a certain extent, globalization has also led to diversity within organizations, which is, it has helped create diverse environments or working environments within the organization, and this sometimes can also create a barrier, and we will look at this with one or two examples. Now, let's look at how this, culture and values create a bit of a barrier. So example that I put together here is, it talks about, when you look at people from different geographies working and providing services in different areas. So for example, a doctor, which is from, his origins are from China, but he or she is working within the UK. And when you look at doing communication with certain types of people within the organization, an organization taken here is the case of an NHS, what you get to see is that the doctor has to be sensitive about the cultural differences in which in the cultural differences, especially say in the Asian context, to be able to communicate that information across to the patient. So what you do get to see is sometimes that, say for example, NHS in the UK has a workforce, 40% of the workforce within the NHS is, from different cultures. It is diverse. So it has a diverse workforce within the NHS National Health Service here. So we get to see that there are doctors from China, India, European Union, different countries who are working within the NHS. But sometimes when you get to meet, patients and you have to give them some advice, you have to take care of the culture and the values they have, and that's how you will see that, sometimes this brings across a bit of a communication barrier. So typically you will see that women from the Asian culture, if they have to be given advice related to, say, certain sensitive matters, they will always prefer to have a male or, their husband along with them when that is being discussed with the doctor. So this is a cultural thing, which is basically coming out from the Asian values, which the doctor who's giving an advice on has to be sensitive at. And sometimes these, factors have to be looked at predominantly when we look at workplace communication. So in the case of workplace, this is an example where NHS, and we look at this as an example for a conversation between a patient and a doctor. Now, the other thing that we have also looked at, let's look at from a corporate world point of view, and an example that I picked up is when you look at the values and culture, when you look at companies, specifically the Japanese companies, they have a very, explicit way of expressing politeness. So sometimes you will see that people from these organizations, they are taught in their culture and their values that if you have to greet a visitor, to greet a customer, you have to express, with that, that basic warm feeling of gratitude by, say, giving away a business card with both hands and also slightly, kind of bending to in a gesture to kind of, wish the person good. So here, what you're looking at is again the culture influence how the communication practices develop within an organization. If we are to look at this across the globe for American organizations where the culture is quite informal, and obviously even during formal meetings, it is understood that you will shake hands and obviously you'll hand a business card over with one hand and things like that. But when you look at Middle Eastern culture, there again the women are not normally they do not shake hands even during business meetings, and you kind of greet them by a gesture using body language saying that okay, with the greetings and things. So again, these are things that we have to look at when we look at values, we look at culture, we look at language, and we also look at in which part of the world that you are operating within the organization. And these three factors then influence workplace communications, with regards to, the interactions that you have within an organization. Now, we may also draw some sort of, conclusion because it is shown by research that a lot of, barriers in communication sometimes can be overcome by the use of technology. And here, if you see, sometimes we take this quite lightly that, okay, we are, say, I am as of now verbally communicating, but you will see that because we are visually able to see each other and also hear, there is a lot of hand gestures being used, and I am making use of my body language to basically, kind of explain certain concepts and the tasks that we are discussing. And this also then becomes a part of your communication. So when you look at communication in general, there are lots of aspects which are which is not in terms of just speaking, understanding, verbal gestures, body language. All this become a part of the communication process. Now, the other thing that we will look at is in terms of once we know and understand that how communication can be affected by cultural and values and organizational structure, what we need to be able to do is understand how do we overcome some of these barriers within workplace with the use of technology. Now, what we've seen over the years is, say, post the 90s when the internet came out, Sir Tim Berners-Lee actually introduced the internet, and in 1995 this kind of changed or revolutionized how people communicated, because before that we used mostly the postal system, telegrams and things like that, letters, which meant that any sort of communication being sent across, was, if it was, primarily official and was being sent across as written, used mostly post. But with the advent of internet, what had happened is the communication landscape has totally changed. So what we see is the increasing use of internet, which is helping us create, share, and transmit data, information, and knowledge across the organization, both internally and externally, so within the organization. So what this has meant is, with the advent of technology and how it has advanced over the years, a simple example, when the internet came about, it was primarily very low speeds. Only very few people could access, and only companies or organizations had access within the office when it was introduced. But now we talk about fiber optic, speeds in terms of gigabytes and terabytes, which means that the information, even with the use of internet and technology, can be transmitted quite quickly, and you can download tons and tons of data in a couple of seconds or in a couple of minutes. So here, the use of technology has influenced workplace communication. It has the benefits are quite clear that it basically allows very faster sharing or quicker sharing of data. Data could be data for people at the lower level. It could be information at the mid-management level, and it could be knowledge or extracted in terms of reports and analysis being done on that information as knowledge reports for the senior management. So the aspects of having to use technology in the communication process has both benefits, but also we will look at some of the hindrances which technology sometimes also creates, or I would say advantages and disadvantages. So there are advantages that it has faster response time, it is easy to download and share information. Everyone almost becomes aware of the information at a very at the instant or at the same time within the organization. If it is to be communicated using emails and things like that, you will see that most employees would be able to get, say, for example, an announcement from the HR in the form of a news, in the form of a notice, almost instantly, because it's shared using an email or a notice board, or it's been put out on the intranet within the organization. You will see that sometimes the use of technology also helps to reinforce a spoken message. That means you've had a bit of a meeting with the manager, and there were a few points of discussion where somebody has taken some notes for the meeting, and then that is circulated as minutes of the meeting across to the employees via email, so that nobody misses out on any point or any points of discussion which has happened. So technology that way also helps to reinforce some of the other forms of communication that is done, which is verbal, within the organization, and that could be done in the form of, written communication. But the dissemination of that written communication in the form of minutes of the meeting done via email is use of technology. A lot of organizations now, because of the green agenda, are also looking at paperless organizations, and where that is where you will see that a lot of this documentation, communication happening, or interaction, sharing of ideas, knowledge and information being shared amongst employees, peers, and even within the organizations is being done using more and more electronic form of electronic mediums, essentially. Now, sometimes technology is also used in the form of, when we say written communication, because you want to keep a record of the information. So if you had a meeting, you've had some verbal discussions, but at some point in time, you want that verbal discussion to be documented and then circulated in the form of, say, an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, or a minutes of the meeting, then also technology would help you store, share, and also disseminate information. Now, the other things that we also look at is, there are lots of advantages of IT, and I think it's quite pertinent. What I've done is I've put some bullet points here in the speaker notes to explain the advantages of how technology can be used to kind of, ensure that the communication happens smoothly. It also helps create a record, and also at some point in time it is happening across offices, across geographies, if the organization is functioning as a multinational organization. It also has other advantages, like sometimes now we prefer to type rather than hand type or handwrite the information, because what we do see is sometimes ineligibility in terms of handwriting also kind of can hinder or become a barrier for communication. So paperless organization, when I say, as a concept, is also becoming important, because in order to ensure that the record is, maintained, and also it has accurate information, it is typed rather than handwritten, things like that. But there are other aspects that we will look at in terms of communication, and, obviously, retrieval is also one of the key areas that, I should mention here, is that with the help of technology, when you're able to store the information, but you're also able to retrieve the information quite quickly, because of the fact that, electronically stored information can be retrieved from the server, can be retrieved from archive. You can look and dip into your emails, but the same information is kind of documented, via paperwork or filing. Then in that case, what will happen is sometimes retrieval of information becomes, cumbersome and time consuming. So again, one of the advantages there. Now let's look at some of the flip side, which is what are the disadvantages, if at all, if there are any, for technology when we use the technology in workplace communication. Now, one of the things that we've clearly seen is there is an over dependence which has started to happen on emails, for example. Sometimes you'll see that when you're working within the office, you get maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 emails, and you get a lot of emails. So this, what is happening is essentially a lot of employees are writing a lot of emails, some communication which can happen essentially face-to-face, or it could be transmitted verbally. is being unnecessarily documented in emails. That is why sometimes you will see that some employees sometimes would prefer to just send you a quick email rather than walk over and have that discussion face to face. Now, there could be various reasons why this is done, but this shows that there is a bit of an dependency, which is over dependency, which is happening because everybody just wants to have this feel good factor of that. Okay, I say this to him verbally or her to verbally, but it'll be best if I document this by sending a quick email. Now, the other thing it is creating is basically a lot of people are receiving unwanted emails. So the channels of marketing, when you look at email as a channel of marketing, a lot of emails coming through which you receive on a daily basis, which could be emails in terms of promotion, offers. Even if you've not subscribed to some of these things, sometimes you end up getting a lot of emails, and this could create a bit of an overload. So this is maybe one of the hindrances, that sometimes you will see that the main message that you want to communicate or want to look at gets lost in the number of emails that you're receiving in the office. Now, culturally, if we see what is happening with that is because everybody needs to respond to emails, and this has become one of the official channels of communication, what is happening is that people are getting consumed by the number of emails they are getting on a daily basis and replies, and most of the work is happening is basically just work which is related to receiving, replying to emails, and that is not being very productive as seen in some of the organizations. The other bit is that sometimes if you get a lot of data, you have a lot of electronic data, and if that, say for example, file is to corrupt or the PC is to crash, you will end up losing data because not much of is being now documented or kept in the form of paper. So one of the drawbacks could be that if you look at having everything stored electronically with the use of technology, you will see that essentially, if there is a crash of the PC or if the equipment is to, break or, let's say go faulty, you will end up losing data to a certain extent. So what we do get to see is that there is a bit of dependency which is currently happening on technology, which is both to the advantage and disadvantage. Now, let's look at very briefly one or two things in terms of how technology helps communication and what are the changes which have happened over the last few decades, which has really made us dependent on technology, and we see technology as a key enabler for effective communication. Now, I put together a few slides which I'm just going to quickly run through briefly, but when I email this across to you, you can go through them in a bit more detail, and they are quite self-explanatory. Now, these are documenting some of the changes which have happened over the years and how technology has got totally integrated into the communication channels and communication medium. So what we do see is some of the changes which I mentioned are major changes, like with the coming in of fiber optics internet or fiber internet, and the advent of new satellites, which are now being used for communication. Communication is becoming very faster, and it is almost instant in some cases. Cellular technology, or mobile as we call it, when it came across in the early 1990s, it transformed the world. Before that, you pretty much had, fixed line phones, but with the advent of mobile phones, what we do get to see now is there are more mobile phones than fixed landline connections in the world. Wireless, when we look at, again, is a big change because that allowed technology within the homes, equipment and devices to be connected simultaneously. Fax machines, we saw they're pretty much still there, but they are disappearing now because emails or electronic fax, e-faxes have taken over. But fax machine used to be one of the key things wherein transmission of information could happen more or less instantly before mobiles or some of the other devices came across. Advent of technology has also come across into laptops. They become increasingly faster, smaller, more battery, and notepads and things like that. So the advent here, this basically talks about different types of devices which have come in, from mobile phones to fax machines to laptops and other things like the internet or wireless, which have made technology very useful and has allowed communication to adopt various types of technology for various types of technology to be able to transmit or, share data. Now, when we look at it at an organizational level, distributed computing, data centers, cloud-based computing, these are things which have also come in terms of advancements in technology, and they have allowed not just voice as a data or, to be stored, but they have allowed text, images, audio, video, and, other forms of, things to also be then made available using, technology almost instantly. One clear example that we are using ourselves is the concept of webinars, which was probably unheard of for maybe 10, 15 years back because the internet did not support the speeds or the bandwidth. And with the advent of, fiber optics or, faster internet, we now are able to send, create, consume information, which is not just visual, verbal, but a combination of all the, mediums of communication. When we also look at some of the subsequent slides, basically talk about some of the advancements, how different segments are able to make use of it, and because of technological advancement, the speed at which the communication is happening is pretty much instant, and we are able to almost transmit any form of data, or whether it's just emails, rich data, which could be audio visual data, it could be video. All this is something which we are able to use using the advent of technology. Video conferencing is one of the concepts. So webinars, video conferencing, wherein you are able to send audio visual data, and those are things that we see that is happening. Now, one of the slides which I put together, when we use technology, we need to also have policies and procedures in place, which most organizations do in terms of what is the optimum use of technology, how to use it, and what not to use. So an example here would be when we look at, say, let's look at an example of a training seminar, or you're being asked to do a training. Now, sometimes you're overwhelmed with information during that, training seminar is because, the trainer might take you through a PowerPoint slide, and there are lots of slides that you're going through, and you typically get bored because it is saying death by PowerPoint presentation. So we need to moderate and effectively, kind of have a balance between what is being presented, how much is being presented. So sometimes you will see within the training seminars that you attend, the trainers will actually use different mediums to communicate different points. So you will see that sometimes they will basically use PowerPoint slides. They will give it a bit of a break, use the flip chart, give it a bit of a break, use the whiteboard, and then for some of the concepts or some of the things that they want to discuss, and might even ask you to do an activity or get together into groups. And the idea here is that they want to basically use all the appropriate mediums to engage with you as a attendee, so that the training which they are delivering or imparting has the maximum effect. So here again, these are policies and procedures put in place in order to attract, retain, and then also engage with you while you are in such training seminars. So another example that I would take here would be in the case of, say, emails. In a lot of organizations define do's and don'ts for emails. When you write an email as an employee from the company, what are the official, things that you need to take care of in writing an email. So the use of email has become quite normal, but a lot of companies write email etiquettes to be able to say that these are the ways in which these are things that you should actually take care when you're sending and receiving emails. For example, typing messages in capital is seen as screaming, or asking for undue attention. So not all letters or all things communicated in emails should be in capital. Capital should be used to attract attention or draw attention towards some important points. You need to be able to punctuate your messages so that they are bulleted, or punctuation or grammar is used appropriately, so that it does not feel as if you're sending a longish message or something and the message gets lost. So you have to be short and precise when you're actually looking at sending or composing an email. And sometimes it is also mentioned, because this has now more or less become an official form of communication it has become important that you pay attention to spelling and grammar in the way it is being written and how this is sent across. So a lot of organizations expect you to do a bit of a spell check, grammar check before you even send the email out, and these are tools which are now built into your email clients. A simple example related to this would be when you hear of the word called KISS, which is keep it short and simple. Sometimes on PowerPoint slides and trainings which are being delivered, they normally say that you should not have more than 5 bullet points or more than 30 words or 20 words, sorry, on each slide. This is to balance the way you put across information and how people are able to consume information. So it keeps them attentive, at the same point in time draws attention and helps you deliver the message that you're trying to deliver. So some of these things have become a norm, and it is important for us to also understand that if they are over, then they turn to be hindrances or disadvantages of using technology in communication. Now, very briefly, having looked at this, what we want to also look at is what policies and procedures can be implemented when you look at processes of communication within the organization. Now, when we look at something like this, what we do tend to see is that there are 3 things which have been put in place. One is there's a lot of legislation which has been put into place because a lot of communication is now happening with the use of technology. There are other things that we also look at is we have to keep in mind the balance of some of the acts or laws which have been put into place. And when we do send across information, we need to be careful about what we are looking at, what we are sending, what type of information we are sending, whether it is sensitive, can it be shared in the public domain, or is it something which is related to personal data of an individual. So some of these things, when we look at, are covered under the policies and procedures that can impact the workplace communication processes. One of the key things which I will include now, and I think you must have heard about this in the news, that there is a new law which is now coming in, which kind of supersedes the Data Protection Act of 1998, and because the new regulations being introduced, talk about GDPR, and GDPR basically is, the Data Protection Act has not undergone, any sort of a change over the years, but now because of the advent of the way we consume social media, there are lots of changes which were required to be done, and they are now being enacted into the Data Protection Act under the GDPR Act, which is now going to over Protection Act, and that is called Journal Data Protection. It is called Journal Data Protection Regulation, and this comes into effect, with effect from 25th May. So anybody who is any organization which stores your data, whether it's personal data, any sort of data, if they hold data on you, then they will be required to actually take permissions for this data to be stored or shared under the new regulation. So we will discuss this, and I think this is a major change which is now happening in terms of communication, and it is worthwhile mentioning that what is GDPR and how this is now being taken care of within the organizations. So let's look at this. I've not put together any particular slide on this, but as I go along, I will kind of put together some sort of a slide. But let's look at understanding first, the Data Protection Act before we go into GDPR. Now, Data Protection Act was introduced in the 1998, and this act, when it was introduced by the government, was primarily done because some of the communication started to happen electronically. Data and records were being stored across organizations. When you apply for memberships or you buy something, whether it's in the form of a shopper's information card, like a club card, Tesco club card, and things like that. So they introduced this act to protect the personal and sensitive data of every individual. It allows individual to request information about what has been stored by an organization within through a written request, and that needs to be complied with from the organization having that data within 40 days. It also requires individuals to consent before this information can be used by the organization. And some part of this, is in the next slide, which I'll cover, is summarized in the 8 key principles which were put together in this act. Now, if you are seen breaking the law, if the organization is actually seen breaking the law, you can be fined up to £500,000 if you have sensitive information about an individual and that has been stored without their consent. Now, what is the information which can be stored and what is considered and how is it classified? So let's look at personal information, which includes name, email address, date of birth, and a unique identifier for a candidate, say, for example, your national insurance number. And that is a unique identifier which the government has to keep records on each individual. Sensitive information could be information related to your ethnicity, your cultural beliefs, your background, your physical and mental health, and your criminal records. Now, this side of information can only be, kept by organizations which are subscribed to the Data Protection Act or are under the ICO regulation. So, if you are on the ICO register and have relevant certification, training in place, then and then only you can keep hold of this sensitive information. Now, what are the 8 principles under the Data Protection Act when it was created by the government in 1998? These principles included, things like that the information is going to be processed fairly and lawfully. That means organizations were asked to keep hold of that information if they could have safe storage and they could show that this information could be used to benefit the customer and the business activities of the business should the customer, subscribe to have that data, that information, sorry. They could be processed for a specified and lawful purpose. These could be adequate, relevant, and non-excessive. That means you could have information which is related to a particular incident, if it was relevant for that particular incident or that situation, but not have this stored for, in general, for any particular reason. It had to be accurate and up to date. It is mandatory that if it is not necessary, then that information needs to be deleted or needs to be taken off. Sometimes if this information has to be processed, it has to be processed in accordance with individual rights, which means that if a company has to use your information, your personal information, for certain, promotion, marketing activities, this has to be done in accordance with, your individual rights. Some of this information was subject to appropriate security. That means things like your national insurance number, your ethnicity and other things can only be, within the organization. If it was stored as an information, can only be retrieved by people having the appropriate level of clearance. That means not everybody would have access to it, but people at different levels would have access to different types of information related to their area of work. And then this information was not processed outside the European Union unless the country had provided or gained appropriate security to be able to share this information. So in this case, if a member of, say for example, if you're a member of the, if you're British, you're a member of the European Union, not a member, but if you are residents of the European Economic Area, then this information was not allowed to be stored by companies outside the European Economic Area. So information about residents of European Union was supposed to be stored and shared or utilized under the Data Protection Act within the European Economic Area. Now there are some changes which are now coming in, and this change which is now coming in is primarily coming in with with the accordance of GDPR Act, and this act takes into the European Union legislation and has to be incorporated within every has to be incorporated by every organization under the European Union Act. So what does this say? It addresses basically the export of personal data outside the EU. But apart from that, this also brings in line the Data Protection Act with the changing times of the use of social media, how much information can be stored and retrieved by companies like Google, Facebook, and things like that, and how long can they keep your personal data, and when is the when is it considered that there is a breach in, say for example, the personal data. What sensitive personal data can be stored, and then last but not the least, how this data can move from records if the individual is to request for it in writing to an organization. So these are things which have come under the GDPR Act, and this GDPR Act now comes into comes into play on the 25th of May, wherein every organization has to comply with when it comes to holding data of individuals. So this is one of the major changes which are now coming in. It's one of the not recent, but I think this is a major change in the last 18 years from the time the Data Protection Act was introduced. So it is a very major upgrade which is happening in this particular section, and this will affect workplace communication to a larger extent. A lot of organizations are, obviously sending in their staff onto trainings with people, especially in the HR and other areas which manage marketing communication or HR communication, so that they are aware of, what changes are coming, what is this act, how this will be used, and in general, why is it very important to follow in order to avoid fines and in order to basically make sure there is compliance. One of the other things that we will also look at very briefly would be the Equality Act. Now, when we talk about policy and procedures, and we talk about the relevance of policies and procedures, code of practice, or legislation within communication, is that this law actually provides what we do is, as an organization, a lot of employment opportunities and other things are put out today using the internet or electronic mediums. So here the Equality Act also says that equal employment opportunities are provided. So we need to be aware of certain acts which can or cannot be used. Sometimes when you are communicating things externally within from an organization. So things like the Equality Act, Discrimination Act, Health and Safety Act. These are acts that we need to be aware of. Sometimes when you're looking at doing outward communications, they have to keep in mind that the type of audience which that communication is going to address is going to be diverse, and we do not need to be seen as an organization discriminating against any sort of culture, person or belief of a person or an individual. And some of these acts have to be then followed, and that is why they are now incorporated into communication policies or manuals when large, multinational or global organizations. Lastly, in order to conclude, so let's understand what, in summary, is the importance of policies and procedures within the context of workplace communication. Now, different organizations, different companies will have different, meanings for policies and procedures, and they would differ from person to person. But in order to have the same, understanding of what this policy helps us to do or what this procedure is for, the employees across the organization are given, this policies and procedures manual, so that everyone has the same understanding in terms of, communicating externally, internally within the organization. Now, most of this policy and procedures, when I say most, could be dealt with or are used by people which work within the organization or departments within the organization which communicate externally. So one such area could be marketing communication, marketing, business development. You look at HR, for example, they then tend to communicate externally with a lot of different and send out a lot of different types of information. So the policies and procedures become very important. So what we will see is that, in essence, this as a practice is, in order to make this effective communication practice, organizations put communication policies and procedures in place and then adopt stringent, checks on them to ensure that there are no slippages in terms of how the organization communicates its mission, its values, and obviously its objectives to people externally in terms of the organization. From an organization perspective, how they communicate externally to people within the market. And this, to a certain extent, can also lead to fines, can also lead, for example, if there is a lapse in, say, for example, communication, that means certain things going out which were not supposed to go out, then these lapses can have these policies and procedures through which then action is taken against employees if there are such breaches which happen when it comes to sensitive data being leaked outside the organization. You will get to see this very clearly in press releases and in communication which is sent out for public consumption by the organization. There is something like a BBC Newsnight, which typically also happens, on a program which they tend to kind of say that, okay, these are the things that we said or have got covered, but they were inappropriate. A recent one, just a few days back, you would see that, when they acknowledge that Labour has lost quite a number of seats, it was not seen to be gains for Labour Party when the local elections happened. But some people reacted to BBC saying that, the Tories had a good day or whatever, the Labour did not win as many seats as they expected. And this was then raised by a lot of people saying that, okay, this information was not accurate. Labour won 70 more seats as compared to what they did in the last elections. They won some of the seats, strongholds which were considered to be stronghold of the Tory party. But because they felt that this information was not communicated properly, and this showed a bit of bias on the side of BBC, they then raised this, and there is a policy and procedure wherein BBC then covers the views and opinions of its viewers to acknowledge that certain mistakes were made, and they can only be checked, corrected, if there are policies and procedures in place within the organization to effectively deal, detect, and then acknowledge that these slippages have happened. So once again, in terms of workplace communication, these are requirements which most organizations have to put in place to deal with situations when these lapses typically happen. And you will see evidently, whether it's a small organization, a big organization, multinational organization, there are policies and procedures in place when it comes to communication. Who's the authorized spokesperson, what you're allowed to speak, what you're allowed to share, are a part and parcel of that particular policy or procedure when you are given that opportunity to become, say, for example, a spokesperson for the company. And that would say that you have to adhere to this code of conduct. You have to follow this, the guidance which has been laid down. And these are things that you are able to share, not share, comment on. And beyond this, you'll have to say, okay, I'm not authorized to comment on that. Or, you see the POTUS, press conferences, the presidents of the US press conference, when it is done by Sarah Sanders, the secretary, the communications, conferences which are held in the US, you will see that she does sometimes remark that, okay, I'm not authorized to comment on that, or I do not have information on that. I'll have to get back to you on that. And these are things which are done because she understands the policies and procedures and the remits of what she can actually diverge in terms of information when it comes to question answer sessions, or when it comes to press conferences with regards to sensitive data being asked from her. So, actually, what I'm going to do is stop here for today in terms of today's session, and then just to recap what we've covered today is we've basically looked at learning outcome 2. What we've done is in this learning outcome 2, we've understood how communication is influenced by values or cultural factors within an organization. We've looked at understanding how technology can benefit and also sometimes become barrier in the communication process within the organization. And lastly, what we looked at was what is the importance of policies and procedures and why they need to be adhered to so that workplace communications can be effective. And in some cases, we've briefly, with the use of examples, looked at sometimes how these policies and procedures become important when it comes to sending information externally from an organization. Now, what I'm going to do is obviously send this email across to you along with a handout which will allow you to kind of read through on some of these objectives and tasks that we've covered. And very briefly, what I'm also going to do is let's look at some of the tasks in particular about the assignment brief. Just very briefly looking at that. Let me get that assignment brief. Yeah. So let's look at some of the tasks which are required to be done in Learning Outcome 2. So Learning Outcome 2 basically talks about, you need to look at the evaluation of how communication is influenced by values and cultural factors. You're going to be talking about, things which are primarily related to language, custom, and, culture, and maybe pick up any organization and then explain the values and cultures within an organization and how communication is shaped up, taking into consideration in accordance the values and cultures. The second part talks about how technology can be used to benefit. So here, I would suggest you could do a table, because the command verb here is explanation. So you could pick up and draw up a table wherein you could do the benefits and advantages and disadvantages of use of technology in the communication process. You could make use of some of the bullet points that I put across in the slides in terms of showing the advantages and disadvantages. And last but not the least, talks about how policy procedures can impact the communication process. Here, my suggestion would be to pick up a particular example of an organization and then use and explain how they have put certain policies and procedures in place. Example could be you pick up a spokesperson, somebody who's a press spokesperson for the company. What are the policies and procedures they have, and then explain very briefly in maybe 20 to 30 words that how they use this as a policy to look at providing information during a press conference or a press briefing. So that will help cover your learning outcome too. If you have any queries and questions, as always, please feel free to email, and I'll be more than happy to discuss that with you just before we start the next session. And look forward to obviously speaking to you again. Thank you. Bye for now.